217. For the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Thank you, Senator. Serge Infanti is Managing Director of the Foodco Group.
Thank you.
Robert Fitzgerald, Executive Director of the Foodco Group.
Thank you for being with us. And I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of your remarks, the senators and members will follow with questions.
Thank you. As Managing Director of the Foodco Group, I welcome the opportunity to be here today and hope that our public submission will assist the committee in improving the operation and effectiveness of the Franchise Code of Conduct. Further, I hope that our submission sheds some light on the major factors we believe causes franchisees and indeed small businesses to fail. I have been involved in the industry since 1991, firstly as a franchisee and then in various senior management and executive roles. I was appointed as Managing Director in 2008. Foodco is a family-owned business which commenced operation in Australia in 1989 with the first muffin break opening as a family-run cafe. Our Jamaica Blue franchise began in 92 with our first store in Miranda, Sydney, which is still operating successfully today. We now have approximately 330 franchise business retail outlets, trading through the Muffin Break Bakery Cafe franchise and Jamaica Blue Contemporary Cafe in Australia in 2000. In 2001, we expanded into international territories and have since grown our offshore network to approximately 140 stores operating in 7 countries. Successful franchisees have been the key to Foodco's ability to expand its network to approximately 330 locations nationally. Our franchisees are small businesses located across every state and territory and play an important role in regional centres. Foodco operates its head office at the Entertainment Quarter in Sydney and employs more than 140 people at that location. Our national network engages approximately 2,400 staff on a permanent and casual basis. A significant byproduct of our network is our support for Australian farmers through the substantial procurement of flour, canola oil and dairy products. Foodco is very proud that over 29 years we have enabled many hard-working entrepreneurial Australians and New Zealanders to be self-employed and achieve their business goals. As a testament to our strong relationship with our partners, 43 franchisees have been part of Foodco Australia and New Zealand for 10 years or more. The majority of our franchisees are motivated and proud of the brands they represent. This is reflected in the fact that over 80% of our franchisees will soon attend our national conference in October. Our key objective is, and always has been, to succeed through making our franchisees successful. Muffin Break and Jamaica Blue is the head lessee for most of our franchise sites nationally. This is a significant financial commitment for us and something we take very seriously. A franchise business which is unable to pay rent creates an immediate liability for us as the head lessee. Failure to pay rent can result in the lessor terminating the lease and recovering unpaid rent and damages from us. Given the significant financial consequences we face as the head lessee, it makes no commercial sense for us to pursue practices which would make our franchisees less competitive. We do not shy away from the fact that there have been franchise failures, and unfortunately in the retail sectors, failures do occur from various reasons. I have been in the industry for almost 30 years, and the past 2 years have been the most difficult period for retailers that I can recall. The retail sector has had many casualties. Margin squeeze caused by difficult economic conditions, rising costs and declining sales have resulted in the failure of many large and small retail businesses and shopping centres. It's important to note that many of these failed businesses are not franchise systems. Where a franchisee is facing financial challenges due to the events outside of their control, then we endeavour to assist by way of proactively approaching lessors for rent abatement and by offering reduced royalties, increasing operational support and rental assistance. In the event a lease is terminated either by mutual consent or by the lessor terminating, then it's Foodco, not the franchisee, that pays a surrender fee, which could be upwards of $250,000 depending on the remaining term of the lease. Foodco often does not pursue the franchisees for these fees. In presenting our public submission, we believe it's important to recognise the contribution that the franchising industry makes to the Australian economy, and that any regulatory improvements must strike the right balance between the code and the rights of individual businesses to operate freely in a market that creates jobs and consumer choice through competition, innovation and entrepreneurship. Further, our submission focuses on the broader aspects of the franchise system and the environment we compete in. We also provided our recommendations as they relate to the terms of reference of the inquiry. We acknowledge that a few former franchisees have submitted details of their personal experiences, and out of respect for those individuals, we have not addressed the specific circumstances detailed in their public submissions. We believe that overall the code is sufficiently comprehensive and strikes a fair balance and coupled with the provisions of the Consumer and Competition Act of 2010, it is an effective way to prevent exploitation of franchisors without discouraging the franchise business model. Whilst some improvements can be made to the effectiveness of the code, it's our view that the major contributing factors to franchisee failure within the retail food sector are outside of the code and can be attributed to the following factors. Firstly, economic conditions affecting small business generally, for example, rising electricity costs, rapidly increasing rentals, more than CPI, penalty rates, and the changes to the competitive landscape that make it increasingly difficult for small businesses to compete effectively. Second, the conduct of the owners of the major shopping malls and the need for legislative reform to protect franchisees and franchisors from unfair conduct and abuse of market power. Too often these matters are painted as disputes between the franchisor and the franchisee when in fact the root cause of the conduct is the conduct of lessors in retail shopping centres. Thirdly, structural changes in the way consumers shop, for example, the rapid increase of online shopping, which has significantly affected foot traffic in shopping centres and changed their focus from one of apparel to one of food, hospitality and experience. This has meant a significant increase in competition for existing food retailers, resulting in a reduction of top-line sales during a period of increasing operational cost. Consequently, this has led to an increase in retail failures. Whilst we believe that overall the code is sufficiently comprehensive, we do recommend that the following changes would be beneficial. Make legal and financial advice mandatory when entering into a franchise. Second, the code should require franchisees provide quarterly management accounts and separate year-end financial statements prepared by an independent accountant with an accompanied compilation report. The franchisor should have the ability to terminate a franchise agreement if the report is not provided within a reasonable time. This addition to the code will enable a franchisor to verify the key financial data necessary to assist an incoming franchisee with their due diligence at the time of sale. In recent years, we consider that the imbalance of power between the lessor and retailers have been a major contributor to small business and franchise failure. The power imbalance is real and at times leads to uncommercial and unviable situations to remain at a location. We believe that establishing a retail tenancy code of conduct to address the imbalance of the power between the lessor and lessee will go a long way to addressing the major reasons for failure. Over the years, there have been several reviews and changes to the code, and despite these changes, we continue to discuss the effectiveness of the code and seek solutions to try and prevent franchisees' failures through code improvements. History has demonstrated that the process of simply focusing on changes to the code to minimise failure is fundamentally flawed. Indeed, our experience in the UK and New Zealand, which has no mandatory franchise code of conduct, is disputes and failures are less common than they are in Australia. On behalf of Foodco and the franchisees, we encourage the committee to consider that perhaps the solution does not rest solely with code improvements via more disclosure obligations, but in areas outside the code, and in particular in the areas of retail tenancy legislation and the imbalance of power that occurs between lessors and retailers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Infanti. And may I ask for a copy of your opening statement?
Sure, it's got some scribbled notes on it.
That's fine. We can probably read past those.
That's fine.
Having heard you deliver it. So thank you very much. And I'll go to Senator Williams straight away.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald, Mr. Infanti. Take us through the steps of how Foodco makes money. For a start, you sell a new franchise that's been established?
Yeah, we have a revenue stream that includes franchise fees, royalties.
So, all right, you might sell a new franchise for $300,000, you make money there?
Yeah, well, we don't make money, it goes back into running the system. But yes, that's one of our revenue lines.
Okay, you supply all the products for the franchisee?
No, we only supply coffee.
Don't supply milk?
Muffin mix.
Sorry?
And muffin mix.
Yeah, we don't supply the muffin mix. That's our proprietary product. They have
You
to
have
buy that.
contracts with supplying companies?
That's
to
correct,
supply.
sorry, yes.
So you supply the coffee beans only?
Yes.
You don't supply the milk?
No.
You don't supply bottles of water?
No.
You don't supply food or anything?
No.
Okay, now...
We have arrangements with our suppliers, but we also don't force our franchisees to buy it if they can find the same quality at a cheaper price.
Okay, so you make the money when you sell a franchise to the initial start-up?
There's a fee associated.
You sell them
with
the
that.
coffee?
Yes.
Do you charge a commission for their weekly turnover?
We charge a royalty based on
Royalty,
weekly
how much is the royalty?
It varies. Muffin Break is 7% and Jamaica Blue is 6%.
of their gross turnover for the week.
Correct.
And is that royalty, does that all go to Foodco franchisor, or is there some used for advertising?
Advertising is another 3% on top of that, and that's all
so-
expended and audited.
So it's
by-
basically 10% of the gross turnover a week.
Correct. 9% in one of our systems, 10% in the other.
Okay, well, round figures, yeah. Of that 3% you take on advertising, do you spend all the money, every cent on advertising?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, more. Sometimes the advertising fund goes into the red and we beef it up.
Right. Now, I want to take you to Maggie Zoo. When she bought the Burwood Jamaica Blue, was that a new franchise,
No, that was an existing store.
existing one? And she bought it on a 5-year lease?
She had 3 years remaining, I think, if I recall.
I think she had 3 years, 5 years, she had 3 years to renew it and it wasn't renewed.
She had 3 years left on the lease term, yes.
Well, I thought she had 5-year purchase for $300,000 and after 3 years it wasn't renewed. I'll just check that. Anyway, her figures went up the first year and went up the second year. Why was her lease not renewed?
I would prefer not to talk about the circumstances, if that's possible, Senator, more the general circumstances as they relate to the terms of reference. But if I can go through the process of what we look at when we do renew a business, maybe that will answer the question.
Well, it's pretty controversial.
Well, look, I can answer it. Simply, it
You're
was
under
not...
parliamentary privilege, go your hardest.
Yeah, look, it's in our interest to renew shops. We make money, as you said rightly, on royalty and coffee supply. So we don't like closing stores around Australia. However, that store was fundamentally uncommercial for both the franchisee and for us to pursue that lease for another term.
But her figures were going up. I've seen the
Simply,
figures.
she didn't make a profit, Senator.
Okay. Had the business been making a profit prior to her buying it?
Not that we believe, but there was no profit and loss in the sale contract.
So she bought the business and it wasn't really making a profit. And she paid $300,000.
On reflection, now that we have...
Hold on.
Sorry.
She bought the business, you don't think it's making a profit prior to her buying it. And she paid $300,000.
I'm not sure of the price, yeah.
I'm sure the price was $300,000. For the business that was not making a profit. You would have been aware of that sale at the time?
We interviewed her as part of our process, and through that interview process we make it very clear on the steps that we recommend that she takes. But ultimately it's up to the vendor and the purchaser of a business to agree on the terms of that sale.
Do you get any money out of that sale proceeds from the vendor?
There is a transfer fee.
How much is that?
It's $15,000 or 4% of the overall price.
15,000 minimum or 4% if it's above that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So if it's 800,000, it'd be 32,000. If it's 200,000, it'd still be 15,000.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Now, when she bought that business, was the muffin break business operating in that building at the same time?
No, there was... Muffin Break came in after that.
Okay. About 2 years later, Muffin Break came in, Fahim Mirza bought it, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Was that a new franchise?
Yes, it was.
When that opened up, Maggie Zoo's business fell 40%.
It's not correct, sir.
You're saying that's not correct? Did her business fall when it opened up?
No.
It didn't?
No. Her 12-month sales after we opened up were actually better than her previous 12-month sales. And that's because we replaced an existing cafe.
You replaced what?
We replaced Aroma's Cafe. There was an existing cafe there. And Muffin Break and Jamaica Blue are very different target markets, and that was indicative of the fact that her sales actually increased.
So you're telling me when Maggie Zoo bought the business, there was another coffee shop in the building?
There are many coffee shops in the building, but the site that Muffin Break went into had an existing coffee shop in it.
Right. Because both Mr. Mirza and Ms Zhu claimed that when Mr Mers opened up, her business dropped substantially. I'll check with her on that. You're saying it didn't. You're saying when the second Foodco franchise opened up in the same building, that her figures did not go down. You sure?
Yes, sir.
That's a no, by the way, because Hansard doesn't record a shake of the head. Sorry.
Yes, sir.
You sure? Okay, I'll check with that. I want to go to Mr Alan Pearson, Jamaica Blue. He's made a submission. He's been in front of us. He paid $560,000 for the franchise and ran it for 13 years. You're familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yes.
He paid over $1 million in royalties over that 13 years, he claims. When it comes to decommissioning the store, who gets the quotes for the decommission to bring the store back to bear?
We have an in-house construction and development department
Right.
who looks after all those affairs for the franchisee.
Your in-house one?
Sorry?
Your in-house one looks after all those affairs?
Yes, we make sure that the franchisee gets 3 quotes and we give those to the franchisee. And then if the franchisee wants to get their own quote, we allow that to occur as well, provided it's done as per the specification that the lessor wants.
Sorry, just to be clear, Senator, we have an internal advisory group. We don't physically do the construction.
Oh, yes, sorry. We don't have a
because your
construction.
quote was $49,000 to decommission the store. The landlord did it for $20,000.
No, it's not our construction company. We just go get quotes from 3 construction companies.
You got the quotes.
Yes.
Your quote was $49,000. The landlord did it for $20,000 is what I'm telling you.
But can I just comment on that, Senator Williams?
Please do.
At the end of the lease term in that situation, the landlord came to us and asked us to stay on for an extra 3 or 4 months. And as part of the incentive for us to stay on for 3 or 4 months to trade through Christmas, because they couldn't get a replacement for that site, they discounted the make good on that operation quite substantially. So they basically said, we'll do it for this much. But that's a lot less than the external quotes that we had to do that job.
Well, Foodco would not renew the lease for Mr Pearson, apparently. Is that true?
We don't renew leases, it's up to the landlord. But the landlord's conditions on that were such that Mr Pearson didn't want to pursue those renewals either. So we had no choice but to walk away.
So Mr Pearson still owes you money, owes Foodco money.
He does, yes.
You said in your opening address, often you don't pursue those monies owing to you, correct?
Correct.
You are pursuing that money owed to you by Mr Pearson,
Correct.
who is 71 years old. His wife is 69 years old. They've lost their house. They've paid $560,000 for the franchise. They've paid you more than $1 million in royalty. They have nothing, and you are pursuing them for more money. Is that correct?
No, we're pursuing them for the debts that they owe us over the last 12 months.
Well, okay, let me rephrase that.
But the asset wealth...
I'll just repeat that. They paid $560,000 for the franchise. Over 13 years, they paid you more than $1 million in royalties. They've lost everything, including their house. 71 years old and 69 years old, respectively, him and her. And you are pursuing them for monies owed to you.
We have a case against them at the moment, yes.
How do you get blood out of a stone?
Sorry?
How do you get blood out of a stone?
Well, I'm not sure of the asset wealth of Mr Pearson. What I can tell you, Mr Pearson stayed in that franchise for 13 years. It was one of our best performing stores in Australia for many of those years, Senator. And I'm not sure that somebody who was doing it really tough would stick around for 13 years running a small business.
Why wasn't the lease renewed?
The commercial terms offered by the landlord were far in excess of what we can afford, and that was agreed to by Mr Pearson at the time.
He claims that when he bought it, that Foodco were widely, the figures were widely overstated. We were assured gross revenue would exceed $18,000 a week when we were taking in $12,500. Foodco's response was, we'll send somebody out or your windows look too bready. Your cashier isn't upselling. These he's saying, the responses from Foodco, when they got the business, they didn't do the turnover that was expected.
But Senator, we didn't sell that business to Mr Pearson. He purchased that, as he says in his submission, from an existing franchisee with the sales figures that were provided by that franchisee. We don't get involved in that situation, sir.
Isn't that a significant risk to your brand?
I'm sorry, Senator?
Isn't that a significant risk to your brand that you don't get involved at that point of sale transfer?
At the point of sales transfer, there's an independent business there that sells to somebody else and they get their own independent legal advice. It would be a conflict of interest for us to get involved in that situation.
But you get 15 grand out of it at least.
But that's not the driver for us having involvement there. We don't actively tell franchisees to sell their businesses because
It's a pretty good kickback. It's a good real estate commission, 15 grand to sell something for 300.
The best way we get kickback is making our franchisees successful, Senator.
Well, you must
That's
do
how we
pretty
make
well.
money.
You must do pretty well then.
As part of my recommendation, I do put in there, though, that we as a franchise community, and the code should enable us to take an active part in the transfer of these businesses so that we don't get those situations occurring.
So what stops you from providing your visibility of the sales data?
Oh, we can provide sales data, and in fact we do provide sales data. But it's up to the the purchasing franchisee to ask for the details of the P&Ls around that business. And as I said, there are only 2 states in Australia, I think, Victoria and South Australia, that under their acts require a profit and loss to be attached to a sale contract of a business. In New South Wales it's not required, in Queensland it's not required, in West Australia it's not required.
So P&Ls can be provided, but...
They can be provided if the purchaser
But the concern that
requests
we
that.
hear in the submissions is that of the veracity of those P&Ls. You
Yes.
have data, hard data in
Yes.
relation to the sales, because that's
Yep.
where your royalty payments and marketing payments come from.
Yep. And Senator,
and
we
do you provide that to a new franchise, a prospective franchise?
Yes, we provide a printout of the sales reports that is reported to us. And then if there is a profit and loss associated with that transfer, then we go through and say, look, that's within parameters, that's within parameters, and that's within parameters. But it's not required.
Except in 2 states.
Except in 2 states, yeah.
So are you automatically notified if one of your franchisees is going to sell their business?
Wants to sell, yeah, we have a sales process where they advise us that it's for sale. We send out a sale procedure saying we need to interview the candidate. We need to go through these steps.
So you do have involvement in the
Yes,
process?
we have involvement in approving the franchisee that comes into the system.
But you don't automatically go through a process of giving them information about profit and loss unless you're required to by law?
No, or it's requested by the purchaser. So the purchaser sometimes says, look, I've been given this P&L by the vendor. Can you tell me whether it's within the parameters of your system? And of course we go through and do that. And at the interview process now, we definitely give them the sales reports as reported to us. And then they're obligated to go and do their own due diligence with their own financial advisor and their legal advisor.
Mr. Infanti, you're in business, you're watching the business. You know the turnover of your franchisees, don't you? Because they pay you roughly 10% on their turnover.
Yes.
Well, a business turning over a certain amount of money, about what percentage of that is required to pay labour?
To pay labour?
Yeah,
On our numbers, on average, it's about 28%.
about 28. Well, some of these witnesses and submissions say Foodco told them 21 to 22%.
No, well, I deny those allegations.
You know that allegation? So, by that turnover, you'd have a pretty good idea. 28% on labour. How much on rent, on average turnover for your franchise?
About 16 or 17%.
Okay. And inputs to run the business? From coffee
the
beans
cost-
to electricity to maintenance on equipment, machinery, depreciation, etc.
We break that down, but cost of goods runs about 28 to 30%, depending on how effectively the franchisee manages that area.
So up to about 73% now with labour, rent, cost of running. What other costs are involved in the franchise?
The predominant ones are what you just explained. So it's labour, cost of goods, and occupancy costs. They're the three
That
big
gets
ones.
us to 73%.
Yeah, and of course the royalties.
There's another 10 gone, that's 83.
Yeah.
So you're looking at about 70% gross profit for the franchisee.
Yeah, there are other costs associated, incidental costs, but we've done an analysis. We think it's somewhere around 13 to 15%, the average return on our systems.
Right.
Does that include equipment upgrades?
Once somebody buys a business, there shouldn't be a need for equipment upgrade until the refurbishment, which is about 5 years down the track, 5 or 7 years, depending on the end of term of the lease.
But unless you buy the business like at the 4.5 year mark or something, we've had one submission here that said they were expected to provide upgrade costs almost immediately after they bought the business.
It would be, not from us, but it would be a requirement from the lessor if that's the case, basically due to a lease renewal. So when we do a lease renewal, the lessor often comes in and says it's either a knockdown or rebuild that they want, or it's a minor refurb, and we negotiate with them to try and get the best deal for the franchisee.
So is that included in those costs that the Senator was just
In our
talking
disclosure statement, what we say is that at the term of renewal, there will be a requirement from the lessor to do a refurbishment, and it will range between this and this because it's an open-ended area, really.
Sorry, Senator, for interrupting.
You're right. I want to move on to Mr. Fahim Mirza. When he bought the Jamaica Blue, I think, wasn't it? Or Muffin Break, which one? Muffin Break. Was that a new store?
Yes, that one was, Senator.
He says that total labour costs would be 20 to 21%, but Foodco labour costs 27 to 30%. My wife and I work 50 to 83 hours per week for zero pay.
We deny that there was anything in relation to 21% on food costs, Senator. As I said before, our analysis of our system, on average, runs the labour around 28 to 30%.
Well, going to Mr. Mirza's submission, he says that the actual cost that you presented to them was 20 to 21%, but you are conservative. You say 27 to 30% based on the fact that a franchisee could pay themselves a wage as part of that. So does that 28% that I think you said earlier, does that include a wage to the franchisee?
No, we leave the franchisee out of that calculation. That's not included in that
That's
calculation.
quite at odds with what Mr.
It's 28% to run the system, excluding the franchise partner.
So how much did Mr. Mirza pay for his Muffin Break at Burwood?
Exactly, I'm not sure, Senator. I can come back to you if you wish.
And that was a new store, correct?
Yes,
Was that on a level, a floor below
Above.
Maggie Zoo's Jamaica Blue above?
above.
How many floors in the building?
3. Well, I think
3.
1, 2, 3.
And did you do research to see that when you opened Mr. Mirza's store, there were plenty of clientele and plenty of customers that not affect Miss Zoo's business?
Yeah, there was plenty of customers running through Westfield Burwood. It's a matter of our ability to capture them.
When Mr. Mirza bought the store, did you give him a guesstimation of what expected turnover there would be?
No, we don't forecast turnovers. We allow them to do their own due diligence.
So I've got a feeling 560,000 rings a bell he paid for it. I'll try and find it. I'll come back to you later, Chair, when I find it out. So you're saying you put up a new store, he comes in and buys it, and you give him no estimation, guesstimation, whatever, how much it will turn over a week?
No, we give him our system parameters and what our system runs. We give him a list of all the shops that we have around Australia. We ask them to go and do their due diligence. Senators, we have deceptive and misleading conduct legislation in this country. We have to be very, very careful to do any predictions in regards to future earnings. And that's essentially what holds us back. We can't give you that site is going to do X amount of money or income. The other reason is we don't know what a shopping centre landlord will do. They might put a competitor in the next day.
How do you put a price? I want to find out. I'm pretty sure it's 560,000. Let's say it's 500,000 he paid for it. How do you put that price on?
We didn't put the price on. How do you mean we put the price
It was a
on?
new store.
If that's what the construction was, we do a construction budget which includes all the...
You mean the fitting out of the shop?
Yes, correct.
Right. So you fit out the shop and then you put a price on it?
Yeah, we get contractors, we get 3 quotes and that gets built into the price.
Well, it probably wouldn't cost you $500,000 to fit the shop out, would it?
We don't get any money on the construction, it's contracted out completely.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, if you fit out a vacant shop, and let's say you spent $300,000 fitting it out, how much would you sell it for?
We don't actually buy it and sell it with a margin.
No. So you're telling me if I went in and bought a new store off Muffin Break,
Yes,
and you sold it to me for $500,000,
yeah,
that it's cost you $500,000 to set the shop up?
correct.
You don't make any profit on it?
No. We just charge our franchise fee.
So you charge a new store what it costs you to set it up?
Correct.
Nothing else?
Correct.
And do you do due diligence and look at forward estimates of some sort of scale to say, is it worth spending $500,000 in this building, given the level of customers and expected cash flow and expected... What sort of due diligence do you do to say, righto, we'll spend $500,000 in this vacant shop in this building and we'll do pretty well out of it? How do you work that out?
Well, in that case, firstly, we had an existing cafe there, so we can quickly gauge as to what they were doing. Then we look at our own system around Australia.
Okay, let me stop you there. The existing cafe, how is it going? When you looked at it, and how was it doing?
We can gauge...
We'll talk about Miss Zoo. You had an existing cafe there.
Yeah.
How was it performing?
Mrs. Zoo's cafe?
Yeah.
It wasn't commercially viable at the expiry.
Okay, so you just said we have a look at the existing cafe in the building, so you've got Miss Zoo not being commercially viable, and you put another one in the building.
No, Senator, I think Mr. Infanti's referring to the Aromas Cafe that was there before.
We replaced Aroma's Cafe with the Muffin Break. There was a cafe there before.
And Roma's Cafe.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. Was it hugely successful, or did it go belly up?
I'm not sure. I'm not privy to those. Those numbers are confidential. We don't get those
So
numbers.
you
The
went in
landlord
and
won't give us
Roma's
those.
Cafe closed.
Yeah.
You went in and set up a Muffin Break,
Yep.
knowing full well the level below had a Jamaica Blue,
Yep.
knowing
And
full well
Jamaica
Jamaica Blue was going bad.
Jamaica Blue sales improved when we went in.
Hang on, you're getting ahead of me. You just said Jamaica Blue was not going well.
No, it wasn't going well.
Not commercially viable. You knew that, yet after 2 years of that, you put another one of your franchisees in the same building, correct?
Correct.
Well, this is what I find
But,
amazing.
Senator, can I just comment on that?
Please do.
The Muffin Break Burwood is 30% up and trading very strongly
After you put the store in.
Today.
since we've taken it back.
The Jamaica Blue was going rough. You knew that. And you put another store in that building.
We replaced another cafe in that building, and our store at the moment is trading very strongly.
Well,
There are many factors involved in
yeah,
success.
because one's gone now. That's
No,
the
but
point.
that's been replaced by another cafe.
One of your franchisees?
No,
No, this is the point I'm making. You knew Maggie Zoo's business was going pretty bloody ordinary, correct?
it wasn't commercial.
Well, if it's not commercially viable, that's another way to say it's doing pretty bloody ordinary business, correct?
Yes,
And you put another one of your franchisees in that same building, knowing one that you were tied to, one that you have all this duty and care and responsibility and love and everything else you said in the opening statement for, that was going bad, you put another one in that building, correct?
correct. In a different floor with a stronger location, yes.
In a different floor with a stronger location.
The location of the Muffin Break sits outside a very strong major. And since we've taken it over from Mr. Mirza, the sales of that store have increased substantially.
Is it making a profit?
Yeah.
And of course, Miss Sue's was folded up, wasn't it? The lease was not extended after 3 years, and I believe she took a lease until 2020, a 5-year
You might be
lease.
confused with the franchise agreement.
franchise agreement.
Yeah, that doesn't entitle you to a lease.
Well, I
The
still
franchise
find-
agreement is conditional upon renewal of the lease.
I still find it amazing that Ms Sue's business was going rough and you put another one of your franchisees in the same building. I mean, why didn't, if that was the case, why didn't you say, Ms Sue, you're going rough, we won't renew it. We'll put you down here where Mr Mercer actually went and you can really kick ahead. Did you ever think of doing that?
Mrs Zhu was not in a position to continue to invest in businesses, Senator.
Nah, she'd blown 300 grand. She'd been a typical Asian who came here to get educated, went back and did a accounting degree here, went back to China, came out with a husband. And when I say a typical Asian, head down, backside up and work, 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 just like nearly all the Asians do when they come to this country, they see some opportunity. And her business was going bad. Did you ever consider offering her the new business down a level down in a far better position?
We would have been happy to offer it to her, but she was in no position to take it.
Yeah, and we know why the Regent's in no position to take it, even though figures had gone up.
But Senator, with respect, she poured an existing business. We did tell her to do a due diligence.
Senator, I think it's also...
her fault, she didn't take enough advice.
She should have taken advice, yeah, but
And if she got that advice, Mr Infanti, what would it have said to her? This is not a going concern, you shouldn't buy it.
if she'd got advice, they probably would have come to us and, well, the advice would have, I believe, requested a P&L to the contract for a start.
Which you didn't have to provide, so you did not provide.
That's a bit odd.
We weren't party to that transaction. So
You
it's a transaction.
You knew the turnover of the business.
Yes.
Yeah, you knew the turnover. That would have given you a rough idea of the profitability of the business. How was it performing prior to Ms Sue buying it?
It was a struggling business in our view.
It was a struggling business in your view.
And we made that clear at the time of interview.
And Senator, Ms Zhu worked in the business for 6 months prior to
that as
purchasing
well.
it.
She was
Yep, she learned the
So
business,
she had
She
complete
was an
visibility.
worked hard,
She was an
put every
employee.
red cent into it, blew the lot, and when she had nothing left, she's up for 50 grand to decommission the building, the shop. Correct?
Yes, although we've paid for that.
Why didn't you pay for Mr Pearson's? He's given you $1 million more in royalties.
Well, Mr Pearson was operating one of our best stores in Australia for 13 years.
I still find it amazing that you knew Ms Sue's business was suffering and doing it tough, and you started another one in the same building.
But Senator, we replaced an existing cafe. We have 70 stores around Australia. Sorry, we have...
I'm well aware you replaced another cafe.
Okay,
But didn't you have some consideration for your franchisee a floor above in that building?
Of course we did.
And on what commercial basis did you
But
determine
Senator-
to advance with another franchise in the same building, given the state of her business? What was your decision making there?
We think the site's a good site. And we've done our due diligence on it. And as I said, since we've taken it over, it's performing very strongly.
You'd all be familiar with shopping centres, and each shopping centre has a huge variety of trading zones. You know, one trading zone can be weak and another can be strong. And, exactly the case at Build.
Yeah. I'm not sure we can underwrite failure in our system. There is going to be failures in franchising as there are in small businesses. It's not our role to underwrite all those failures.
And at least part of Mrs Zhu's commercial challenge in that shop was she purchased a shop for a value which wasn't, like, in hindsight for her, if she had actually got the financials from the selling franchisee, it would not have justified the amount she paid. So she had overcapitalised that business.
So can I put it to you, gentlemen, that when people go into small business, they are totally aware of how exposed and vulnerable they might be, and so they go and they take and pay for very careful advice. This is, generally sound principles that people would apply. When they come to purchase a franchise, there's a degree of trust, of a relationship with somebody with extensive business experience, in which they place a degree of trust. And I put it to you, Mr Infanti and Mr Fitzgerald, that trust in the case of Miss Sue was completely misplaced because you had an idea that that was not a successful business. You said, well, she went in, she saw, she should have known better, she did it.
We'll take our cut now.
Well, we also have a franchisee who's selling a business.
Yeah.
We have a conflict of interest here. We're conflicted in what we do. So, Senator, what we should be saying to everyone out there is that businesses that aren't commercial shouldn't be sold. But the reality is that people do buy businesses that don't perform, and they make them perform, and they turn them around. As we know, there are many factors involved in success. One of them is to do with the franchisee's own commitment, the franchisee's abilities, and so forth and so forth. So, normal business cycle, anyone who's out there says, I want to pay this much for a business and I want to buy an existing going concern, not a new site, and I trust myself to be able to turn that business around. We shouldn't take that initiative away from people by saying, no, don't buy that business. And we have a conflict of interest here. As I said, we're also the franchisor for that franchisee selling and the franchisee buying.
So
There are
you're in a
many
position of
circumstances.
power, Mr Infanti,
Yes,
to
you
make
are.
them expose the reality of that business.
And we do.
And so you're saying now that Miss Sue had full vision of the financial situation of the business she was purchasing, is that correct?
No, we said we didn't have that at the time.
That's right.
And we went through an interview process and strongly suggested that she get financial and legal advice.
So I'm struggling to understand why, in the position of power that you have, that information at point of sale can't be just a transparent set of numbers that are reliable and trustworthy for both the seller and the purchaser. Both of them under the banner of your...
At the moment, as I
Your
said, in
purview.
3 states in Australia, that's not required.
It's not required, perhaps, Mr Infanti, but given this situation, do you think it should be required?
I think the code should mandate that, and in fact, my recommendation says that.
And it's because of that failure that we have this story of Miss Sue.
Well,
She didn't know what she was purchasing.
I dispute that, Senator.
Right, well,
She
help me
did know
understand,
what she
Mr.
was
Fitzgerald.
purchasing. She worked in the business for
she
6
was
months
an
prior.
employee of the business.
She chose to purchase that business without financial statements that would have been provided by a third party. We're not a party to the franchisee's
Due diligence
profit and loss
process.
statement.
Do you think you should be?
Yes, we would like to
We
be
would
able
like
to
to
get
be.
them. The current code does not allow us to actually force the provision. I mean, you can explain that. more.
Correct. Under the code, and that's why my recommendation suggests we go down this path, is that we make it mandatory that the franchisee provide financial information to the franchisor, so at time of sale, we can then endorse that information.
And do you accept, Mr Infanti, Mr Fitzgerald, that that's exactly the kind of care that people think they're getting when they come into a franchise arrangement? They actually believe that there is some benevolent oversight.
But we actually
And that's
go-
why they buy a franchise model instead of going and getting their own business. And what is being revealed in the course of this inquiry is that that purview and that care simply doesn't seem to exist because you're abiding within the rules but not within an ethical frame.
Senator, we have 330 stores and probably 40 of those sell every year. And we've got 1 instances here where we're talking about. So we don't have an endemic problem here. We have a problem of one transaction where the purchaser chose not to get due diligence done properly.
I mean, one series of outcomes in us actually forcing the declaration of a third party's P&Ls is actually the vendor loses their buyer, and then the vendor brings
Comes
us
to
to a
us.
forum like this and
And
says
says,
that actually we've
why-
behaved unconscionably. So we would like it to be mandated that actually they have to deliver them to us, so we don't have to go through that process.
And as I said, there is a conflict of interest there between the vendor and the purchaser.
We have
I've
no
been
interest in
informed-
these. We have no interest in these disputes. You know, we want.
I've been informed that Ms Sue's contract agreement, franchise agreement was for 6 years, but the lease agreement was for 3.
That's correct.
Correct.
And after 3 it was not renewed. Evidence from Mr Mirza, the independent cafe was operating for 4 or 5 years all throughout the time that Jamaica Blue was there. True. The problem is that when the same competitor gives you the exact same coffee cheaper at a muffin break, is muffin break cheaper than Jamaica Blue?
No,
So they sell coffee for the same price?
correct.
He says in a shopping centre where there are customers...
Sorry, they sell the coffee or we provide the coffee at the same price, Senator?
Well, this is his evidence said, the problem is when the same competitor gives you the exact same coffee cheaper up at a muffin break. In the shopping centre where the customers are calling every day, that's why all the customers would switch to the cheaper one because they're getting the same coffee for a cheaper price. That's why all her customers move to my shop.
I don't understand that, really.
Do you sell a coffee to muffin break the same price you do Jamaica Blue?
Yes.
Do you own that company?
No.
Do you have?
We own the supply company. We don't own the roasting company.
You own the supply company for
Correct.
the coffee.
Yeah.
What else do you supply through that company?
Oh, just coffee.
Only coffee.
Yeah. Oh, and incidentals like sugar and
Milk?
things that go with the coffee.
Not milk, no.
Not milk. So to help me understand, do you have complete control of that supply company, or are there other partners?
Of the coffee supply company?
Of your supply company? You have a supply company or not?
Not really, just the coffee supply. But we don't supply milk, we don't supply the premix, we don't supply the cheeses and the dairy products.
And what's your relationship with the coffee company?
We own the coffee supply company.
You own the production of the coffee?
No, just the supply of the coffee.
Right. And who owns the production of the coffee?
A roaster that we negotiate with.
Do you have any commercial relationship with them
No.
where you benefit from purchasing from them? You just pay them? They're just a...
We pay them a fee, and then we make sure we have people within the supply company in our own staff that make sure the quality and the roasting and the specification is as per our requirements, and then we charge that on to the franchise partners at a commercial rate for the coffee.
Senator Williams, we might go to Ms Carney, is that right?
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to go on summary though, Chair, if I could.
Yeah, all right.
So you knew Ms Zhu's business was struggling. You knew when she bought it, the potential was not good. You didn't give her any advice not to buy it, of course. That was her decision.
Sorry, we interviewed and gave her advice, yes, that she should pursue her own due diligence on this.
Right. And on inquiry, Ms Zhu, you paid $300,000 for your franchise, correct? She said yes to my question. Senator Williams, that was to go for 6 years. Ms Zhu, the franchise agreement is 6 years. Senator Williams, so you paid $300,000 for the 6-year lease of the franchise. Ms Zhu, the franchise agreement is 6 years, but the lease agreement only 3 years. Senator Williams, you brought the franchise, you owned the franchise, and the agreement was for 6 years. Ms Zhu, from my understanding, yes. So the point I make is this. You knew her business was battling, yet you opened up another franchise run by Foodco in the same building. I think that's wrong. But anyway, back to you, Chair.
Senator, just on that point, can I say we have 70 centres in Australia at the moment which operate with Jamaica Blue and muffin breaks. They are a very different target market.
The two of them,
Co-located.
Yeah, we
In
have
the same
70
centre, but
in the
not
same
adjacent.
centre.
they're different target marketed.
Correct. And as I
They
said,
sell the same coffee.
no, they don't sell the same coffee. It's a different blend. It's a different roast. It targets our consumer for Jamaica Blue and muffin break.
So you provide a different coffee to Jamaica Blue than you do to Muffin Break
Correct.
at the same price.
Correct.
What's the difference in them?
Well, I'm not a coffee expert. We have people that analyse the blends, but I think it's to do with roast quality, green bean configuration, time of roast, all those kind of things.
Like a glass of wine, Senator, every coffee cup has a completely different flavour profile, and the flavour profile at Jamaica Blue is
Well,
very
there's
different.
two varieties of coffee you buy or your supplier provides. Does your supplier buy them at a different price? In other words, is one cheaper than the other, even though you sell them at the same price to your franchise?
They may do, I'm not sure, but for consistency purposes, we want to maintain a price level across all our franchise network.
Back to you, Chair. We'll have more questions.
Thank you. Over to you, Ms Carney, and then Senator Ketter.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the supplies again. Mr Pearson, in his submission, seems to think that there is a national agreement that they buy from suppliers that are specified by you. This includes things like milk, Coca-Cola, Bid Foods, groceries, and the coffee, of course, and that when asked why that they are locked into buying from those suppliers, which he thinks are provided at retail price rather than a wholesale price or even a cheaper price that they could get from Woolworths, that he's told it's to cover other costs of running the franchise, like conferences, for example, but that he actually has to pay to attend the conferences, etc. Is there a national agreement?
Can I just comment about all that? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of things in that. Our disclosure statement makes it very clear that we supply our proprietary items like branded packaging, coffee, which they go through our system for. We also make it clear that we have preferred supplier lists where we try to arrange, where we do arrange a very competitive offer to our franchise partners, and that includes, for example, the milk supply, which is at $2.19 per litre. But that milk supply isn't a Woolies home brand. It's a branded milk. On top of that, the milk supplier will provide fridges for the stores. On top of that, they will provide trading terms, 30-day trading terms. On top of that, they will deliver the product to the storeroom or to the shop itself. However, we go on to say in our disclosure statement that should a franchisee find a similar product at a cheaper price, then they're entitled to buy it. So we actually don't force them. However, 90% of our franchise network buys through our preferred suppliers because the terms are more acceptable to them.
So it's quite clear to the franchisees that they don't have to buy those products.
Correct. It's in our disclosure statement.
On the matter of, it seems to me that a theme is that the business plan offered to the franchisees is just heartbreakingly understated, that they seem to feel that the costs of running the business are understated, I guess, in what they're given as a business case when they buy the business. And that when they have gone to the franchisor for advice on how to keep the business to that those costs, they've been advised things like, well, don't pay yourself a wage or underpay your staff or find someone you can trust who won't dob on you for underpaying us below award, etc. Have you had any instances that you know of where your franchisees are underpaying their staff or have been advised to do so?
Yes. In January 2017, we were one of the first companies to enter into a voluntary partnership arrangement with Fair Work Australia. We did that because we understand the obligations across the board that we have to ensure our franchisees are doing the right thing. So we, through that process, audit all our stores and do so over a 2-year period. We're halfway through that right now. And there are instances of some underpayment. And we work with the franchisee to resolve them. But the notion that our staff would recommend to our franchise partners to underpay staff, I deny that completely. Well, we have a very strong HR department which is actually out there trying to enforce the correct payment of Australian workers. And we're one of the first companies to actually enter into a voluntary partnership with Fair Work Australia.
So what auditing processes do you have in place?
We have, firstly, we do all the education when franchisees come into the system through what we call our core training, which goes on for about 4 weeks. On top of that, at each store level, we have a hotline number where employees can call our office if they feel there are situations where they're not getting the employee benefits that they should. We've also got a text number that if they feel more comfortable in texting.
How do you let them know about that?
We put one in all our stores through our operational consultants out in the field. And we also have a survey, confidential survey, that they can go in and say, we have some concerns, my franchise boss is not paying correctly. And then our HR...
Have you had any of those come through? Have you got any data or details about how many people are ringing the hotline or have submitted concerns about paid wages?
I have it with me, but my HR department will could advise you, yes.
And then we'd also like to know the remedial action that you took on receiving those phone calls and those submissions.
When that happens, we go in and do an immediate audit. As I said, we have an arrangement with Fair Work where over the next 2 years we're auditing all our stores. But where we are notified, we go in immediately and undertake the audit. And I do know that of the audits that we have undertaken, we now have 100% compliance. So we've put them back on track. The awards are pretty complicated in this country, and some of our franchisees just get hung up on penalty rates and on the correct classification of jobs and things like that. So we work through with them to resolve those issues.
And having done that with those franchisees that were found to be underpaying or not paying penalty rates or underpaying their staff, where you have insisted on them paying full wages, have any of those businesses then struggled to survive? Have you actually, was your business model therefore relying on underpayment of wages?
No, not that we're aware of, no.
Okay.
Would you like to take that on notice, Mr Infanti?
Sorry?
Could you take that on notice, that question?
Yes,
Thank
I've
you.
got to get, yes.
Thank you. And just another question on another issue. I'm interested also in this relationship between the leaseors, the shopping centre owners.
Yes.
It seems to be another bit of a theme running through the submissions is that the franchisees are locked out of those negotiations, that you or the franchisor solely manages the relationships with regards to rent and...
We actually would prefer that they're not locked out of the discussions. We actually like to show the lessor the personal side of their decision making. So we try to get the franchisee involved. The simple fact is most lessors don't want the franchisees at the negotiating table. And the relationship and the answer to that is the lessors say, our contract is with you as the head lessee. That's who we'll deal with. Thank you very much. Your contract is with the franchisee. You deal with them. So in many cases, the lessors will not entertain negotiating with us and the franchisee by our side.
Do you make efforts to involve, to keep the lessee informed about the negotiations?
All the time. And in fact, 6 to 12 months prior to the renewal, we sit down with the franchisee, educating them on the process that we need to go through and keeping them informed.
Okay, I think that's enough for me for now. I might hand over to you, Chris.
Senator Ketter?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to focus on the submission from Mr Mirza, who is a fellow chartered accountant, holds a CPA qualification, and so fairly well-educated franchisee who has been in dispute with yourselves. You've been to the OFMA, as I understand it, and during the course of the mediation proceedings, and this is in Mr Mirza's submission, that Foodco is unable to prepare a legal roster based on actual store data in terms of the costs of wages. Is that what you
We disputed that at mediation. I don't know what else to say, Senator, to be honest, but we can...
Sorry, I missed what you said.
Yeah, we can provide a legal roster, have done to many of our franchisees.
Can you provide that to us?
A legal roster?
Yes.
Sure.
Based on, no, the important fact is it's got to be based on actual store data.
Yes. Sure.
So, yep, okay. So you're saying that that was incorrect. You didn't make that admission during the course of those mediation proceedings. Mr Infanti, my question is, I just want to confirm that you did not make that admission during the course of
We did not make that admission, Senator.
Okay. I'm also told in the submission here that the Foodco labour costs provided in the business model contain underpayments and assume free labour by franchisees.
Free labour by franchisees. As we said before, we don't include the franchisee in our labour component.
Right, but I'm told here in the submission that you made an admission during the course of that mediation hearing that Foodco labour costs provided in their business model contains both underpayments and assumes free labour by franchisees.
Our model does not contain underpayments, but assumes that the franchisee is not included in that labour component.
Right.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Can I just extend on that? We expect our franchisees clearly to make an investment return on their business. It's the whole reason they're there.
Yeah.
Okay. Whether they choose to pay themselves a wage or not is a function of what unit of labour they provide in the shop themselves. If they choose to actually be an overseeing investor, well, no, there's not a wage for being an overseeing investor in the model. If you actually want to be the barista or the cashier or the baker, you know, that's accommodated.
What proportion of your franchisees are actually involved in the operation, day by day involved in the operations?
Most of them would be, Senator, but I can't actually give you numbers.
Do you know how many of them draw a wage in one of those roles that you just described?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Sorry, Senator.
Do you know how many of them draw a wage in the roles that Mr Fitzgerald just described as a barista or a cashier?
No, not specifically, but they take their income in very many forms. As Mr Fitzgerald said, they can take it by way of the profit at the end of the year and break it up in a family trust or share the dividend, or they can put themselves on the wage. It's up to them. But I don't know the exact numbers.
Or indeed, they can take additional drawings out of the business, you know, to fund cars or however they want to run their small business.
Okay. Now, Mr Mirza, as a result of that mediation, reached a settlement with you,
Yes, correct.
and then you took over his store at Burwood.
Correct.
Is that correct? Mr Mirza says in his submission that all of the employees were put under a management contract to an agent who fired all the employees that refused to be underpaid on the spot. And employed some of the previous staff members at $16 an hour on cash with no benefits for the next 6 months. Is that correct?
No.
But there was a complaint to the Fair Work Ombudsman, wasn't there?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can check it out.
Sorry, about Foodco or about Mr Mirza?
Well, in relation to the incident that I just mentioned, no, this is subsequent to Mr Mirza handing...
Against
acquired the
Foodco
store.
or against the party we put in to manage the store?
Yes, in relation to what happened after Mr Mirza.
I'm unaware of that
relinquished
fact, but I can come back to you, Senator, if that's appropriate.
Well, if you read Mr Mirza's submission, you'd see that the information there is that it was referred to you under a proactive compliance deed. Is that,
Yes, correct.
that
I'm
correct?
not sure what that complaint was about, whether it was a mistake, an admin mistake, or was it systemic, or I just can't answer that. So I can get the details for you.
Yes,
but as far as I'm aware, my HR department hasn't alerted me to any issues there.
So there was a proactive... You can confirm there was a proactive compliance deed?
There's a proactive compliance deed across the country, yes,
But for the whole of Foodco?
for the whole of Foodco.
Okay, so not just for that particular...
No, we have a national proactive compliance deed, voluntary one,
And that was that January
2017.
last year? So at what time did Mr Mirza relinquish control of the Burwood store?
I haven't got that information with me at this stage.
Okay, can you come back to me on that?
Yeah.
Now, I'm told that Foodco made all employees sign paperwork that they would have no claims and have been paid fully upon threat of on-spot firing.
Do we make them sign paperwork for what? Sorry.
Well, this is in Mr Mirza's submission. This is, so I take it you had a look at this. Foodco made all the employees sign paperwork that they have no claims and have been paid fully upon threat of on-spot firing.
We have an employment contract which includes a number of clauses, and I'm happy to send you the employment contract that we engage people with.
So you're saying that's not correct?
I don't believe it to be correct, no.
Can you check that for me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Now, just...
Can I just check before you go? Mr Infanti, you've provided a number of responses to the committee. Have you read those responses? Because
Yes,
they
I
do go
have.
to some detail, and I think that they relate to some of the
Yes, I'm
questions
sorry, I
that
just
Senator
didn't-
is asking you right now.
I was told by the committee that I wasn't going to discuss these in the public forum, but I'm happy to have a private discussion about it. So I wasn't prepared to go through the private nature of each of those submissions at this forum. I thought we were talking more about the broader aspects of the
We
code.
will
and
get
the
to both of those, but, you know, there is some need to redress some of
Well, this
these, the
goes to-
detail.
This goes to the issue of the level of power imbalance or the information asymmetry between a franchisee and a franchisor. This is what we're exploring right here. This is...
I'm happy to do that, but
Well, this is what we're exploring right now in terms of what's going on within your particular system. Now, Mr Mirza, as I said, who's got some accountancy qualifications, says that based on the business model, he estimates that the actual labour costs, considering the minimum legal pay under the award system, is 55%, as opposed to the, I think, 28% that you say in terms of labour costs.
I think when you're looking at a model, Senator, you need to take into consideration the sales performance of the business. So clearly, the lesser the sales, the more pressure there's going to be on the cost percentages.
I might say, as an accountant, one would hope that Mr Mirza would understand the impact that lower sales actually have on fixed or variable costs. So it's all about the sales number.
So you get to a situation where if your sales don't reach your break-even point, you're not going to be making money, and that's just a simple small business model.
Fundamental accounting.
So your legal roster that you're providing to us, would that be based on a particular level of employment, such as junior wages? And
We'll give you the average of our system and how it runs.
Okay. Now, you've said that there's no markups on construction.
Yes, correct.
That's contrary to what Mr Mirza has said in his submission, and also Mr Pearson.
We don't have any markups on construction. I can categorically state that, and never have for the 30 years that I've been involved with this.
Is there any
also
special
note, Mr.
relationship with a particular provider of the construction?
We have probably 7 or 8 shop fitters around Australia, whether they be in West Australia or Queensland or Victoria, who understand what's required in a shopping mall and how we go about our business. But at the end of the day, if a franchisee wants to get a quote or wants us to go and get another quote, we do that. I mean, it's in our interest to keep the cost of getting into our investment as cheap as possible.
Thank you.
Well, Mr Pearson indicated that he was charged, or the quote from Foodco was $163,000 for a complete refurbishment of his kiosk in April 2010. He says that the fees and charges payable to Foodco and others represented 11% of the actual cost, plus a margin to the builder. And he says that he was charged or quoted $770 for a common tub chair. What do you say
part
about
of the design spec. So it's like building a house. You have a design spec which you have to get approved by the landlord, and you go through criteria as to what's required in the construction. We get 3 quotes from independent contractors, provide those quotes to our franchise partners. We design the store, and maybe that's what he's referring to, the design fees, but we're responsible for designing the stores, getting it through council, getting the lessor to approve it. But there's no margin on our contractors.
You don't receive any payments from the contractors?
Never.
Okay, well, what about this claim that the common tub chairs are quoted at $770 each? Is that right?
These cafes, as you probably are aware, can be quite palatial, and we have to be competitive. So our design team will specify something that sits within the concept and gets approved by the landlord. And often you get these sites because the landlord has a view of what they want to see in that corner. So
this would this
whatever
be
the tub chair price is, we would get the best quality of chair for the price.
Is this a muffin break
Muffin
or a
break, yeah.
Jamaica Blue?
Jamaica Blue, yeah.
Jamaica. So you're telling me that $770 is
Can be the cost of a tub chair, sure.
is your
Not our
wholesale
charge, though.
cost?
It's wherever we buy it from.
We agree, they are expensive.
Yeah.
Okay, and the work's done by a selected Foodco contractor. Now, can I just so we've got the new protecting vulnerable workers legislation now.
Yeah.
So do you check the wages structure of your franchisees or that meets the minimum requirements?
Absolutely. Through our audit program, we do, yes.
And what about when you've got a prospective franchisee coming in?
We educate them through our training program, the requirements under Fair Work and employee entitlements in Australia, and all the steps that they need to do to take to ensure that occurs.
Do you provide them with a copy of the award or some sort
Absolutely, yes.
of... And the actual rates of pay?
Correct.
What about where you have a franchisee that's got their own enterprise agreement?
The minute we went into Fair Work with the voluntary arrangement, I got out of any of our national agreements and just decided to go via the awards. It was just cleaner and easier.
Yes, but there may be some of your individual franchisees.
I don't think there are, Senator. That's what I'm saying. They've all shifted over from national employment awards arrangements to independent awards as appropriate under the Act. So we don't have any national agreements.
I'd like you to check that, because I think in the case of the Toowoomba store that was operated by Mr. Whitted, there's a suggestion there that the incoming franchisee has a individual.
There might have been at that time, but as I said, as of today, we only have the standard awards. We don't have a national one.
You can confidently say that across the whole system that's the case?
Yes.
All of the employees?
Yes.
Right. Okay, now, do you believe that the business model is sustainable if the owners aren't paying themselves a wage and store profit is variable depending on the circumstances which may be beyond the control of the operator? How is that sustainable, and what level of profit is sustainable
As
under
I
those
said,
circumstances?
on our current analysis of our portfolio, we're running about 13% return on our top-line sales. So
13% return, so what, can you unpack what that means?
our top-line sales across Jamaica Blue are around, say, 820. So 13% of 820 seems to be, well, it is, the average performance for our system, which is competitive in the marketplace. We still have a lot of demand for our system, and we have 330 people out there operating under it.
Well, your question, in a sense, is what is an acceptable return?
Now, for the franchisees?
Yeah, but this question of what's an acceptable return is a conundrum for investors, and for us to opine on what that is, the market will determine what an acceptable return is. And the fact is, people are continuing to buy assets at 10 to 15% returns, and that may well reflect bank deposits being at 1.5%.
And I think
They're attractive investments.
But it seems to me there's a disconnect between what intending franchisees are told at the outset, that they'll be able to draw a return out of this. Why would any sensible person go into a business opportunity where there's no factoring of a wage for them for the hours that they work, and the profit is is potentially variable?
That speaks to
Small business.
pretty much any small business you can think of.
It doesn't speak to franchising on its own.
As far as I'm aware, the government doesn't underwrite general small business. And most small business
So it's
people...
buyer beware in this situation.
Well, it's always been the case. I mean, small business go out there every day and purchase a business with a view of risk versus return. Franchising is no different.
Okay,
Except
now,
that
can I
it's
just...
perceived as a paternalistic protection against a lot of risk.
And as a preferred model to an independent small business.
And to clarify that, the failure rate in small business general is, I think most would accept, is materially higher. And there's a lot of risk in small business. People do come to a system like ours because we do provide, and we're very proud of, our best-in-class training facilities. We have fantastic retail management, very strong retail leasing skills, etc. We have a great package to offer. But notwithstanding all of that, we can't remove the element of underlying risk in a business. It's going to
And we have the typical bell curve performance.
And we are passionate about running our business in a morally and ethical way. And if you read our recommendations on how to improve the code and the environment, hey, we're big buyers of that.
But you actually don't suffer any real loss if your franchisees go out of business.
No. Oh, no,
Because
absolutely not.
I mean, Mr. Mers has done a fairly good analysis of what happens here. So your you're getting a guaranteed income stream based on royalties
Yes.
and turnover of the business and marketing. And if a franchisee goes out of business, there's no legal restraint on you pocketing the entire resale price of any franchise store once that franchisee is bankrupt. There's no legal repercussion should you force a franchisee bankruptcy every year and resell the store to a new buyer by adding, any representations that you might want to make. And even if you sell that bankrupted store for half the price, the gain equates to roughly 4 years' worth of average royalties, and hence franchisee bankruptcies are actually beneficial for Foodco.
Well, we don't act like that, Senator. Senator, the reality is that if a store doesn't perform, we have an underwriting liability to the lease. So if a franchisee is not successful, we go in there, we carry the losses for that store to the end of its lease, we underwrite the rental payments required, we have to do the make good. At times when we have to surrender the lease, as I said in my submission and my opening statement, we have to pay damages to the landlord if the franchisee doesn't succeed and the landlord terminates the lease. We're on the hook for that.
I think that analysis is, to be honest, delusional.
Yeah, we do not.
If a store goes broke and it ends up on our balance sheet, we're operating the store as a company store. And we will seek to either close it, run up to the end of the lease and close it, or if we believe it can be rebuilt, we will do that, and then we will sell it. But do you think the purchasing franchisee from us, are they going to ask for P&Ls and sales? Yeah.
And we give it to them.
And we give it to
attach
them.
a P&L to every sale. So if we're in a loss situation, what is the franchisee going to pay for that? There's no value in churning.
So the analysis is delusional.
But the franchisee does the selling in this case. If they think that the business isn't, you don't step in and sell the business on behalf of the franchisee.
No. If the business has gone broke and we've taken it back on our books, we have the lease on our books now.
What usually happens? Is that normally what happens, or is it what happens here where the
It's one of
the
many
franchisee takes on
situations,
that?
but it's also plausible that a franchisee who is not performing in their business will seek through a business broker to sell their business and will refuse to provide accurate financials, etc., 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 and it will transfer to a new franchisee. Now, we could say, actually, you must provide the financials, and if you don't, we're going to terminate you. Well, we have unconscionable behaviour language in the code that would make that a challenge.
Good faith
So it
provision.
I just
transfers.
want to go to one other final point before I finish up.
I hope that clarifies your question, Senator.
Well, that's your perspective on it. I understand what you're...
That's fine. That's why we'd probably prefer to have a more robust discussion privately on some of Mr. Mers's allocations.
I'd like to go to another area, which is that your financial report to the 30th of June 2017 indicates a dividend payment of $5.254 million was paid to shareholders, which was an amount larger than the net profits over the two reporting periods covered in the report. And I note there was no dividend paid in the 2016 financial year. Can you tell me why such a large dividend was paid?
I think the previous year was only 4 months. Is that what you're comparing?
Correct. So we converted.
We
from a trust-
consolidated our business. So
Yeah.
one period only shows 4 months of the consolidation and the other one shows the full year.
Okay, so we've got a $5.25 million dividend payment. I'm asking why that such a large dividend payment was made, given that that figure is larger than net profit periods over the net profits over the previous two reporting periods. And this,
You're asking about our profitability.
I'm asking, no, about the dividend payment.
I'm not sure. Can you just allow us to look at the financials? Profit before tax is what you're talking about.
I'm talking about your dividend payment of $5.254 million paid to shareholders.
Oh, so you've got a different.
I might have a different
I'm
analysis.
I'm still not sure on the point of your question.
Okay, well, so the question is, why such a large dividend? It appears to have been financed through a reduction of cash on hand, 7.2 million down to 5.8 million, as well as new borrowings. Is it appropriate to be paying such large dividends when it's clear your franchisees aren't doing so well?
But I don't believe that's the case.
I don't believe that's the case. We keep advising the committee that we have a very strong and successful franchise network. We're very proud of our success. I'm not sure why we're not entitled to a dividend.
We've been in business for 30 years, slowly building this business, material capital investments. The size and nature of our dividends and capital structure, I don't think is relevant in this discussion.
I can say that for the first 15 years, we hardly made a cent. And we put all the money into growing this business. So.
Okay. Well, my question relates to the dividend payment. So are you telling me that are you saying that didn't occur, or?
It certainly did occur.
It did occur, so...
I'm struggling to understand what we're answering here. Am I meant to say that...
Well, my question is why the $5 million payment when that's a figure larger than the profit for those 2 years?
I'll take that on notice and have my CFO respond if that's
we'll
okay.
come back on that because it's not, but we'll come back and clarify it.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Last question from
thanks.
Senator,
Mr.
and then I
Infanti.
do have a few. I'm sorry, I hope you don't mind running a little over time. Thank you.
In relation to Maggie Zoo's store, did you say that when you opened the muffin break, it didn't affect her sales? You told me that earlier on.
Our analysis of the sales reporting on that store said that for the 12 months after Muffin Break opened, her sales remained pretty consistent.
Pretty consistent. I've just got the graphs come through to me. She grew the store 25.25% over the first 2 years, and from June 2016 until May 2017, she went from 25.25% growth down to minus 0.75% growth. Her sales went from $51,741 a month down to less than $43,000.
Senator, for the 12 months after Muffin Break opened, her sales were consistent with the 12 months before Muffin Break opened. During the final 6 months of her term, her sales declined significantly, and I think that coincides with either her not being there or something else that occurred during.
Well, I've just got the figures to show that 12 months prior, after Muffin Break opened, her figures dropped dramatically, starting dramatically from June 2016, falling through August, September, right through the year, a bit of a kick up in October and down. And the figures have just been sent to me. The turnover went down dramatically after you open that other franchise in that building. So I'll get confirmation from her accountant on this as well. Chair,
I can send you our numbers as reported to us if you like, Senator.
please do.
Could I just go to a couple of questions around, to clarify for me on the payment that are made to people when they set up or they repurpose the store or upgrade the store. So who pays that bill? Do you pay that on behalf of the franchise or franchisee? Or
Yeah,
is the
we come
bill
up with
sent
a
directly to
budget.
the franchisee?
No, we come up with a budget. The franchisee pays as per all those quotes. We supply all the quotes to the franchisee. We distribute the funds, and then we fully reconcile the store with the receipt from the supplier and ensure that any return of funds goes back to the franchisee.
And do you have any situations where the franchisee has undertaken the works themselves?
Sure.
And they
more
pay
often than not,
directly?
we have to go back and have it fixed up.
Right. So, okay, just want to be clear on that. Have you had any terminations of stores recently?
Termination,
Yeah, so when you shut down a store.
not from ours, but from the lessor terminating us, yes.
Right. And is that the only situation in which you terminate?
Non-payment of rent, yes.
Non-payment of rent is the only condition on which you would terminate a franchisee?
It's a very significant situation to take somebody's business, so we really just move down that path if it's financial.
Okay. So is there any other situation other than non-payment of rent when you would terminate an arrangement with a...
There's none that I'm
franchisee?
aware that we have terminated, but they're probably, yeah. If somebody trashes the business or doesn't provide the level of service, and there's a default process we go in. If they're constantly in breach of their obligations under Fair Work, for example, we would default them, allow them time to rectify, and then if they didn't rectify, we would terminate, yes.
And with regard to the obligations under Fair Work to pay fair wages, are you aware of any reports of people underpaying students, or particularly overseas?
In our audits?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Right. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
And what do we do about that?
Yes?
Oh, we move straight in and rectify the situation, brief the franchisee, show them where they're out of line. And in the report that I have from HR, in 100% of cases where we have investigated, we've rectified the position and everything is running appropriately.
And do you have an oversight of all of your franchises, or is that just on identification on audit that you find?
No, we have under the Fair Work arrangement that we have a commitment to audit all our stores over a 2-year period, and we're halfway through that now.
Just one question, Chair. Just with Ms Zhu, was she in arrears of any payments owing to Foodco?
She was in arrears with rental, and I think she was on an abatement with us at the time.
On a what?
On abatement. I'll have to check that, but I think we were giving her some concessions.
Yeah, because her rental with Westfield was not renewed. You thought it was unviable?
She was in arrears with Westfield, yes.
Right.
Significant arrears, actually.
Could I just ask about a business, perhaps, Jamaica Blue, that might be going down, so it's losing money? What happens there if you become aware of that?
Jamaica Blue is losing money?
Yeah.
Well, we look at the circumstances around why it's losing money. We try to get in, and if it's operational, for example, just a poor operation, we put extra operational support to try and improve the sales. We give financial assistance to the franchisee by way of not charging the royalties. We pay the rent in many cases if we think it's a short-term issue and we can get out of this.
And on how many occasions have you undertaken this path and had the franchisee rise from the ashes, so to speak?
It does happen, yeah.
Would you be able to take on notice what happens when you undertake these interventions, just so I get a sense of the scale?
How we take a store that's struggling and how we move it to...
Yeah, how many you do over the last couple of years, how many you would go in, how many successfully, recovered, and those who just didn't. So if I could you go in, you do all these things, it doesn't work, then...
If it doesn't work, and it's back to the franchisee's management of the store, we would encourage them that this is not a business for them to continue in, and that they should seek to sell and move on.
Right. Okay, so you have to be confident that it's the franchisee who has the problem.
Sure.
Right. So when somebody comes to buy that business, basically your argument would be it's not that it's unsustainable, it's just that this is a bad franchisee.
If we determine that it's a franchisee-related issue, why it's not performing, yes. And there are many changes, as I said, of franchisees that have resulted in a significant increase in the business and profitability.
And is that your standard assumption? Are there any businesses that you would not resell?
Sure.
Okay, and have you done that?
Have we got any?
Yeah.
There will be businesses that we look to close because they don't perform over the next 12 to 18 months.
Based
on the fact that we just feel the shopping centre isn't stronger as it was. There's been changes in the footprint, that usages have come in to compete with us that have diluted the market quite considerably, so we don't think there's a long-term basis to stay in the centre.
Any previously that you've done that?
Over the 30 years, yeah, we've closed businesses that don't perform, sure.
But for us to renew a business which is uncommercial would be unconscionable.
You couldn't put a franchisee, and most of these things to leave a lease are done with the cooperation of the franchisee. I mean, if a franchisee is losing money and they don't want to stay, often they want to get out of the lease as soon as possible.
They're under pressure to not provide correct details in terms of their financial statements, aren't they? That's a common complaint that we've had. People are not provided with accurate information about sales and costs.
It can be a problem, yeah.
So just to be clear, by the vending franchisee, not the acquirer, or us.
Okay. Can I go to the leasing arrangement? Have you ever endeavoured to be a joint leaseholder with the franchisee, seeing as you both should have some skin
Like
in the
a
game?
joint venture arrangement?
Yep, so that you would go to Westfield and say, we believe in this store, we're going to go, jointly on the lease agreement with the franchisee.
So, sorry, can we clarify, Senator? You're suggesting that we don't have skin in the game. We are the head lessee. We
Yes.
sub-license to the franchisee.
So what, but one of the problems is that they don't get to see that, and you said that there's often a resistance to them being part of it. Have you ever endeavoured to have a joint lease?
No, not really.
Would there be a problem with such?
Well, I think you end up who's controlling who, and it becomes probably a complicated model to execute. I think if we were going to do a company store ourselves, we would just do a company store ourselves.
But when you're going to do a franchise arrangement, is there anything precluding you from having a joint lease responsibility?
No, we could do it.
Right. Could I go just to the banking? When a new store is established, how does the bank get projections? Who provides that?
The franchisee would do their own business case.
Based on what?
Well, we give them average parameters, as I said before. We're very careful not to mislead and mislead them down a certain path. We can't really give them all the data to make a fully informed decision because we're just not given the data by the shopping centre. So they have to go to their own accountant. They have to do their due diligence, go around and look at stores, talk to our franchise partners about similar arrangements and how they're performing, and then come up with their own projections.
So would you say the riskiest moment for a potential franchisee is if they purchase a business that is yet to be established? Is that the riskiest type of engagement for
Yeah,
with
I
you?
think, in general, in business, if you're crystal ball gazing into the future, it's going to be a challenge.
Rather than a known entity.
Yes.
Just with regard to the notion of goodwill, this has been an issue that's come up quite a number of times. When it all comes to an end and you walk away, is there a goodwill component for the increase in the business that somebody might be successful in achieving? Or they have taken their money on the way
If the business is a going concern, if the business is a going concern and continues to operate, then the business has a value. The value typically in hospitality is, I think, about 3.5 times the net profit, and depending on the lease term that's left. So, and this is one of the problems, I think, with retail leasing in Australia. The lease terms are just too tight. And
What
so,
are they normally?
5 to 7 years.
Yep.
And so, in the UK, for example, we have a 10-year lease term and a 5-year break clause that allows the retailer to say after 5 years, I don't want to be in here. But at least they're given the comfort that if they do want to sell their going concern, they have a 10-year period to do it. In this country, you have to rely on the renewal. And as we know from my submission, the imbalance of power that rests with the landlords and the retailer makes those renewal discussions very challenging.
And they continue, the rents tend to go up and up and up.
Very much so.
Okay, and
Unregulated monopoly.
could you give us on notice the scale of the rise in rents in these situations?
Even now, within the leases, we're getting CPI plus 2.5% increases. They're just within the term of the lease.
Right.
So they're growing faster than you can actually keep pace with the economy. And that's something that the landlords demand. At the expiry of your lease, you're open to whatever they believe that site is worth in the market, and you have no data to substantiate what they believe the site to be worth.
Should the franchise arrangement that they make with you as the franchisor match up with the terms of the lease? Because at the moment there's a mismatch, isn't there?
Should the arrangements the franchisees make with us?
Yep.
They do actually now. So
when
we have the same franchise agreement term as we have as a lease term.
That hasn't always been the case, though.
No, we used to offer 10-year terms,
Yes,
but subject to the lease renewal.
right. So you don't do that anymore,
No.
which was the case with Missu.
Yes,
She bought an existing agreement.
she bought an existing agreement which transfers over and has a tail on it that's longer than the lease.
Right. That doesn't happen anymore.
No, it doesn't.
So
But where
everything-
those situations do occur and we terminate the franchise agreement earlier than would otherwise have happened, we give them a refund for the pro rata rate of that agreement.
Okay. Could I go to the bank accreditation? I noticed that you're one of ANZ's panel franchise brands. What do banks require franchisors to do in order to achieve accreditation? What do they want from you?
They want to come in and have a look at our system. So they want to have a look at our management, compliance, our our review of our poor performing stores, how we go about it. They want to ensure that we offer financial assistance when things are required to help the franchisee. You really come under a good faith test. How does the franchisor deal with the franchisees? What are our support structures like? What are our training systems? What are our ratio of field people to stores? All these things are considered before you get an accreditation.
Okay, and what advantages do franchisors gain from having a bank accreditation? What's the advantage of you going through that?
Financial benefit?
Yeah.
No, we have no financial benefit. We're accredited with a number of banks.
Which ones?
I think the major banks all accredit us.
The Big Four?
Sorry?
The Big Four?
Yeah,
major banks,
I think so, yeah.
Anyone else?
I'm not sure.
Could you take that on notice? You just said that you never get a financial benefit from having this relationship with the bank. They provide you with no payment in return for the business that they write.
No.
Okay. What constraints does accreditation place on your franchise group?
Constraints on our franchisees?
On you?
Only that we review regularly with the bank to ensure that we choose to do this. I don't think it's actually a constraint that they place on us, but we choose to have regular reviews with the bank to ensure that any customers they have of ours are not in default, and if they are in default, we can step in early and help the process.
And who's advised of that? Is the franchisee, the franchisor and the bank all aware at the same time that this review is going on?
Look, it depends whether we've got a tri-party agreement in place. Because of the confidentiality nature of bank lending, we prefer to have a tri-party agreement where the bank can share information with us.
And how many cases with your franchisees does that occur? What's your percentage of tripartite arrangements?
I wouldn't know, but I think ANZ has a tri-party agreement with us. I believe they do.
Could you take that on notice and give us a detailed response?
The question again is how many banks have a tri-party agreement with us?
Well, how many do you have with each of the banks? So do you have arrangements that are not tripartite?
I think when I'm referring to a tri-party, I'm talking about a national arrangement with them. So we have a national tri-party agreement where we can be notified.
Okay, so you might have that with ANZ but not with Westpac, for example?
Correct.
Okay, I didn't understand that. I wanted to be clear about it. Are franchises' debt ranked ahead or behind the bank in your franchise system?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I might give you that one on notice. Just if I can, the last part about the franchise startup costs.
Yes.
Could you explain to me what are all the elements of the startup costs for a franchise?
Look, there'll be a number of elements. For example, let's start with design. So there'll be a design element that needs to go through a comprehensive design procedure that needs to be approved by the landlord, needs to be approved by the health department. Then you move into construction. There'll be a construction component to the budget. Then there's an equipment component of the budget. Any other fees. There's contingencies that we need to allow for. There are things like Category 1 works, and it's changes to the main part of the services of the building, for example, air conditioning and drainage penetrations. It's quite a complicated process when you're dealing in shopping malls.
So could you provide a notice?
Sample budget?
Yeah, thank you. Outline of that. When it comes to terminations, have you had any difficulties in managing those terminations, and what happens if there's a dispute around terminations?
As I said before, most of the terminations result when the landlord hasn't received rent and take a position that they want the site back, so they terminate immediately. And that's often a difficult period of time.
So how do you manage those disputes?
Major disputes with... we do have some disputes, but it's really a situation where it's an action that's been initiated by the landlord, not by us.
So you're telling me that on no occasion have you had a dispute at a point of termination that had anything to do with anything other than rent?
We have disputes. Some of them are to do with rental, some of them are to do with other factors, but most of the times that we need to move to termination are as a result of non-payment of rent.
Okay. So have you had any terminations that end up in the court system?
In the court system, for other than non-payment of rent?
Well, no. When you have a termination,
Yes.
whatever the cause of the dispute,
Yeah, we have one at the moment.
right, well, tell me about that one, Mr Infanti.
I
Just
probably-
in general terms.
A situation where rent was not paid on a site. We had to move in to terminate. There was a claim of misrepresentation, which we're dealing with through the courts.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll wait with interest to see what happens with that one. But I think that we're over our time. Thank you very much for your indulgence in staying back to finalise our questioning. We may indeed have some questions on notice after we review today. So can I just thank you and ask if you could provide any questions on notice by the 5th of October? And the committee will take a break for lunch and resume at 1
Thank you,
p.m.
committee. Thank you.
Oh, 12:45, sorry, 12:45 we'll be back. That's going to be quick.
Thank you.